Benvenuto. Welcome to Cherry Hill Home Cooking. My name is Mark. Today, we're going to be making one of Wade's favorite things to eat. New England Clam Chowder. Now, I know many of you won't believe this because I'm such a sweet and kind and thoughtful person, but in 30 plus years, I've never made clam chowder for Wade. The basic, or I should say the main reason is because I don't like it very much. But he has always wanted me to come up with a clam chowder recipe. And well, that's not true. He eats plenty of clam chowder. Whenever we go out, if we go out to eat and there's clam chowder on the menu, he gets it. So it's not like he's hasn't eaten clam chowder in the past 30 years. But anyway, so I think one of the other reasons, I always kind of thought clam chowder was hard to make, just because if you do it with the clams and so on and so forth. But as I started to research, and actually before I go on to that, I did actually make him clam chowder for the first time last weekend because I was testing out the recipe. And of course he said it was delicious. So anyway, as I started to research, kind of the New England version of a clam chowder, of course I looked at many recipes. Some recipes called for celery. I saw recipes with carrots in it, peppers in it. But I wanted to kind of stay true to a New England style clam chowder. I happened to be online and was just searching for different recipes, and I came across a recipe that said it was the Legal Seafood in Boston's recipe. Now, I don't know if it is or not, but both of us enjoy Legal Seafood in Boston very much, and Wade really enjoys the clam chowder. So I kind of put that one aside. And then I referenced my trusty little cookbook here. This was my grandmother's cookbook. There's lots of recipes in here that she used to make. This isn't necessarily a New England cookbook. It's the New American edition. It was published in I think 1941. And I happened to check out the clam chowder recipe in here. And it was remarkably similar to the one that I came across for Legal Seafood. So I said, I'm going to try that one. Now, I made a couple substitutes. All right, so of course with the clam chowder, the first thing you need is clams. All right, so here I've got about a cup and a third to 2 cups of, they're cooked, but they were, fresh frozen. The way I bought them, I opened up the package before I forgot to, that I wanted to show you all what it was, but of course Wade took some pictures of it, so he'll flash a picture on it. So, of course, that's a very common thing in clam chowder because you have to have clams to make clam chowder. So, in the original Boston Legal Seafood recipe, it calls for 4 pounds little neck clams, which should yield about 1 2/3 cup. Now, truthfully, I don't like killing lobsters or clams or anything like that, fresh ones. So I couldn't go that route. But a lot of the other recipes I saw called for canned clams. You buy it where you buy tuna fish. Perfectly good. I decided to go with these fresh ones, the bigger ones, because since it is something that Wade enjoys so much, I wanted to give him the best that we could put in there. Okay, so the next big ingredient is potatoes. All right, so for clam chowder, you want to use a white, a yellow, or even a red potato. You don't necessarily want to use russet potatoes because those are going to not hold their shape once you get them in and you start stirring everything around. The next ingredient that for this kind of authentic clam chowder is a white onion. All right, so in total, you want about 2 cups. Cup and a half, 2 cups of white onion. And, you just kind of want to roughly dice these. Don't have to be too precise about it, but, cut them into small to medium-sized dice. We're gonna fry them and saute them, and they're gonna cook in the broth, so they will get nicely done. I just wanted to get those out of the way because, of course, the potatoes are going to get my cutting board all wet. So we're going to do those. One of the other things that the recipe in this cookbook, as well as the legal seafood recipe, it called for salt pork. Now, I do use salt pork occasionally, mostly in when I make baked beans. If anybody watching this hasn't seen our Boston baked beans, please go on to look for it in our past episodes. It's one of our most popular. I think we've got over 10,000 views of that. So I do use salt pork, but I kind of thought, well, not everybody uses salt pork or will be all that familiar with it. So in the other recipes, it said to use bacon. Now, I have frozen this. I've got 5 pieces of bacon that I froze to make it a little bit easier to cut. I'm just doing this a little bit different than going over all the ingredients at once because I just wanted to demonstrate to you the different and give you a little background of why I used it. So I decided to go with bacon. Now, last week that I made it, I used the salt pork. But this might be something more people are familiar with, or it might be easier to get. I actually couldn't get any today at the supermarket that I go to. But anyway, I froze it. Now, the one thing I would say is don't use smoked bacon. Use just plain bacon. Don't use applewood smoked or any kind of smoked. You can, but to me, that smoky flavor is going to come through. And clam is such a delicate taste to it that I think it would overpower it. So, like I said, if you freeze this, it just makes it easier to cut. And we want to cut it into pretty small little pieces because you don't necessarily want, a big chunk of bacon in there. So frozen will cut it much better as well if you're using salt pork too. So non-smoked bacon is uncured bacon, or that's what I'm using anyway. Like I said, it doesn't have a smoky taste to it like you would have with your bacon in the morning. All right, so we can just kind of push that aside. All right, then we'll go on to, well, of course, we need a good-sized clove of garlic or 2 small ones. Guys, we all know how to do this. Rinse that up. Sorry, I already peeled it, but you've seen us do that many times. And, you want to give it a pretty good chop. Don't want at least any big, gigantic pieces. All right. All right, so then next thing I want to talk about is in both of the recipes, the one that I found in my grandmother's cookbook and the one that I found online for legal seafood, called for fish stock. Okay, so this is fish stock. Now, I was going to make my own fish stock. I thought, oh, that'll be a fun thing to learn and to show everybody. A little bit harder than you would think because it's hard to get a fish carcass. We don't have a fishmonger here other than what's at the 3 national supermarkets that we have in our area, and I asked every fish department and nobody had fish carcasses, and that's what you need to make fish stock. So I went on a quest to find fish stock. Now, I hate to use an ingredient that's hard to get. I don't think it's necessarily a hard to get ingredient. I saw other types of seafood stock, but for some reason nobody in our area had fish stock. All their websites said they had them, but they didn't have it. That big gigantic store with the big W on it, we have a small one in our area, but up in a couple towns over, there's one of the superstores. So I looked online and it said they had it. So I drove there, and which doesn't surprise me. They've never have what they say they have online. Anyway, so they didn't have it. So I substituted it, but we ordered some fish stock online, which was very easy. Now, don't fret if you can't find fish stock. We also are going to use clam juice in this recipe. So you can substitute all of the liquid that we're going to use from the fish stock and just use clam juice. It's not very expensive. Well, it's a couple dollars a bottle. I mean, 4, 5, 6. So we need $7. If you were going to use all clam juice, you need 7 8-ounce glass bottles of it. Okay, the next thing we're going to need is some light cream. Now, I didn't say this was a low-fat recipe. As a matter of fact, the recipe in the cookbook called for heavy cream, legal seafood recipe, which I don't know if it is or not, called for light cream. Some of the other recipes I looked for that I saw online called for half and half, and even heavy cream again. Anyway, we used the light cream and it was delicious. You're going to need, of course, a little bit of salt and pepper. Again, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because that's the only spices that go into this recipe. Some other recipes I looked at called for bay leaves, Old Bay seasoning, other herbs. This legal seafood recipe and the recipe in the book call for none of that. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a roux. So we need half a stick of butter, or I'm sorry, 1 whole stick of butter. That's a whole stick of butter cut in half. So that's a half a cup of butter and half a cup of flour. So a roux is always half fat, half flour, or if you're using cornstarch, which you could, it's half cornstarch, half water. All right. So then the only other thing I want to do is just, we'll talk about our potato here a bit. Now I only have them in water. I suppose if you were using russet potatoes, you could possibly, after you cut them, let them soak in water a little bit and drain the water. That would help take out some of the starch because the starch would also thicken your sauce, which we're going to thicken it, but we don't necessarily want to thicken it with starch. But it's still, the russet potatoes are still going to be a little soft. So with your potatoes, guys, all we want to do is cut them into even-sized pieces so that they all cook around the same time. So I'm cutting those into roughly 1-inch pieces. Of course, now I peeled them. If you were using red potatoes or even new gold potatoes, you wouldn't necessarily have to peel them. I would peel them anyway. I did peel them. I did use gold yellow potatoes last week and I peeled them. I just think if the skin doesn't stay on the potato, then it's going to end up in the broth. But maybe it would stay on. I don't know. I didn't experiment it. All right, guys. So those are the things I wanted to talk about with New England Clam Chowder. And I'm trying to make as an authentic version of it that I can at least find. Okay, I'm going to clean this. And this comes together relatively quickly and with few pots and pans. All right, I'm going to clean this stuff up. I'll get out our heat source and we'll put everything together. See you in a bit. Okay, so I've got a heavy bottom pan, of course a pan that's going to be big enough to hold all your liquid and your potatoes and everything else. I'm going to take just a little bit of olive oil to get our pork started so it doesn't stick to the bottom. I have the heat source is on medium medium low, maybe a little bit less than that. Point being is we don't want to burn our bacon. You want to get that in there and get that moving around. Now we do want to crisp it slightly and get it cooked through, of course. But again, we don't want to burn it, or brown it, I should say, or too much. We don't necessarily need it, crispy for this case. Also, we don't want to brown it too much because we don't want to add that much additional color to our broth. So it's probably a good idea to stay by your heat source and stir it around, especially if you don't have a non-stick bottom pan, or non-stick pan, I should say. Now, you've noticed at this point, we haven't done any salt and pepper. We've got our fish stock. And we've got our clam juice already. All right, so that's going to probably take 5 minutes. And again, so you don't have to watch the pan cook, we'll be back in about 5 minutes. I'm starting to get that nice bacon smell. Okay, guys, I think that's good. That's just about where we want it. We got a little tiny bit of brown on the bottom, but that's to be expected. So we're going to remove our bacon. We're going to put this back, don't worry about it, but for now we're going to take it out. All right, now that didn't give us a lot of fat. If your bacon's a little bit fattier, that's fine. But, so we're going to put that aside. I think I need a little more olive oil to fry our onions up. So the onions go in all at once. And again, the same thing. We don't necessarily want to brown or caramelize these. We want them to get translucent, soft. Of course, everything's going to soften up even further once we get our liquid in and cook our potatoes. And again, you might want to stick close. This is going to take probably about 5 minutes. Okay, it's been about 4 minutes. I think our onions are exactly where we want them. All right, so I'm going to throw our garlic in, give that a stir, and again, that kind of magic 30 seconds. You'll start to smell the garlic even over the bacon and the onions. Again, if you keep it stirring, you're going to get a little bit of brown, which we want a little bit of the caramelization on the bottom, but it's just that kind of nice brown. It hasn't begun to burn. Okay, I think that's about good. Now I'm going to shut that off just momentarily, and I'm going to add my potatoes. All right, so we got our diced potatoes, and in goes our fish stock. And all of our clam juice. That was a little shy of 4.5 cups because I only had 4 of those, but I increased my fish stock by 1/2 cup. All right, so then we can put our bacon and any bacon grease back in there. All right, let's turn the power back on. And we want to cook our potatoes. So I'm going to put that up to high, and we're going to bring that to a boil just at the boiling point. Doesn't necessarily have to be a rolling, bubbling over boil, but we want to bring that to the boil. All right, we'll see you all back when that begins to boil. Okay, as you can see, we're just about at the boiling point. Before I turn this down, I'm gonna taste this. At this point, it's not gonna taste really all that much of anything other than stock and bacon and onions, but it's actually not bad. I'm tasting it for salt and pepper. We will adjust this again. And you notice I put my cream and my clams back in the refrigerator because, of course, we want this to stay fresh. So I'm going to start now. I've got white pepper. Traditionally, you use white pepper in this. If you don't have white pepper, don't worry. Use your black pepper. I'm going to start about a half teaspoon of the white pepper and put a teaspoon of kosher salt in there. All right, so like I said, you don't want this to, you don't want it at a really hard boil, just about at the boiling point or high simmer. So we can turn that down a little bit. All right, so, and now we just got to wait for our potatoes to cook through, which is going to probably take another 10 minutes. We want them to be fork tender. So when our potatoes are fork tender, we'll be back. All right, guys, our potatoes should be fork tender. Let's grab one of them out of there if we can. Fork tender, perfect. All right, so now the next step we're going to do is we're going to make our roux. Now I'm going to take this off the heat, except that's very hot. Now, normally, if I was at the range, I would just turn it down low and leave it there. But because it's easier for us to cook on here, I'm going to move that over for now. All right. So we're going to put our... I should have checked with that. Hey, we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I forgot that frying pan does not work on the induction. All right, so... we've got our pan right now on medium. I'm going to throw our butter in there and get that all nice and melted. I don't know if it'd be interesting if anybody feels like making a comment. Have you ever done a roux? Really up until just a few years ago, I was kind of always a little nervous about doing it. And of course, like anything else, you make it and you pick up the knack to it, which it isn't hard to do. One thing with this roux is we don't want to brown it again because we don't want a really brown gravy or chowder. So, of course, when you do a roux, you spill grease all over the place. Won't catch on fire there, but... All right, so we got our butter melted, and then we can put all of our flour in. And I'm going to turn it down now that it's melted and hot. And you just want your... butter to absorb all your flour, and you want to cook it just slightly, take away that floury taste. So of course, if you were making a dark gravy, the longer you cook it, the browner it's going to become, and it kind of gets a little more of that nutty flavor to it. I would say it's going to, for our purposes, for this, we need about a minute to 2 minutes. And again, this is one of those things you do not want to walk away from. Just stand over it and stir and stir and stir. And it should be kind of moving all at once like that, bubbling all over. As long as you keep moving it, it's not going to brown too much. It's kind of hard to describe. You'll start not to smell the smell of flour and just smell the slight nuttiness from the butter. And I think that's there. All right, now, okay, so we can just put that back. We're going to put our hot pot there. Back on our heat source. All right, and we'll put that back up to about medium low. Now, when you're using a slurry or cornstarch slurry, you really want your water to be boiling when you go to put in your thickening or your roux. When you mix it to, when you first pour it in, because with that, the chemical reaction, I guess, is almost immediate. It starts to thicken it. With a roux, we don't necessarily have to do that. So, but I'm not going to put all of this in it first, because thickeners and roux can be fickle, and a lot of it has to do with how humid it is and where you're cooking and so on. So we're going to add it in slowly. I'm going to put it up to medium, back to medium. I don't know if you can tell, but it is starting to thicken up. And this is really going to depend upon how thick you want it. Wade does like it to have a little bit of body to it. Some people like it a little thinner. And keep in mind, we also have not added our cream in yet, which will kind of thicken it even a little bit more. And I'm going to let that kind of just cook for a couple minutes before I decide if we need to add the rest of it. All right, so we're just at about the simmer, and you can see that has thickened up quite a bit. But I do think I want to add the rest of it. There's not that much left. So that's perfect, I think. Now, like I said, when we put our cream in, it's going to thin it down a little bit, but then as it heats through, it will come back to right about the same consistency. Now, the thing with corn chowder, I've only said that one in our very first take, which we had to redo. The thing with clam chowder is you want to add your cream close to the end, We're going to add that in a minute, and we're going to just let that warm through. And then the last thing you want to put in is your clams, because of course your clams are already cooked, and the longer the clams are in the chowder or the liquid, the more tough they're going to get. So for the most part, it's best to kind of eat all your clam chowder in one seating. If you do have to, if you've got leftovers and you're going to reheat it, I'd suggest you reheat it really slowly in the microwave, at 50% power for a couple minutes or until it gets to where you want, or ideally, in a small saucepan on low, and just kind of bring everything up to temperature, opposed to all of a sudden shocking it and making your clams even tougher. All right, I'm going to give it a taste. I think it needs a little bit more salt. So we're going to go in with about another teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to do a little bit more pepper. And we are going to check this for seasoning one more time. But I wanted to check it before I put the cream in. Now, so I'm going to turn this down to low. Look at how nice. And what do you think about the consistency, Wade? Do you like that? Like that? All right, I'm going to grab our clam and I'm going to grab the cream and our clam, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so we got our 2 cups of light cream and our clams. Cooked clams, of course. All right, so just gonna start to drizzle this in. And this, why are we drizzling it? Because it just looks so pretty as it's going in. It looks delicious. Starting to mix up nicely. And of course, the reason a lot of places might use white pepper is you don't get the little black flecks showing up. But if you don't have white pepper, don't sweat it. All right, so really we have 2 more steps. We're going to let this come up to temperature. So I'm going to increase the heat to just about medium low. Kind of let that come back up to a very light simmer. And then we'll put our clams in. Then really the only thing we have to do is wait a few more minutes until those heat through. And we got clam chowder. See you in a bit. Okay, our chowder has come to just about a simmer. I'm going to add our clams in. And I've got this on low. And we're going to leave it on low. And for about 5 minutes, we'll bring the clams to the same temperature as the liquid. All right, everything is heated through. Our clams are nice. I've done a final taste for salt and pepper. Of course, that's always to your preference. I did end up adding 1 more teaspoon of salt, and then as soon as we got our clams in and heated through, I tasted it again, and it was perfect. All right, so there you have it, clam chowder, hopefully. It does look delicious. It does. Okay, well, it's very late. It's about 10 o'clock. We got started really late today, which was my fault. And then
technical difficulties.
Right, then we had some technical difficulties. But to make matters even worse, we were up really early for a Saturday because Wade had the cable company here at 7:30 in the morning. But anyway, and of course, one of Wade's favorite things, oyster crackers. What else would you have with clam chowder? Although he puts that in almost any kind of soup we have. So, all right, I'm not even going to pretend I'm going to like this, guys. But I am going to taste it. I just don't. I'm not a big clam eater. So I have my beautiful tomato sandwich from tomatoes from the farm stand and my Cooper cheese. But let's see. I thought I saw a piece of. I got a piece of
That is delicious.
It's good.
It's good.
The broth is really good.
Wow.
I don't know. It's the idea of eating those clams. I mean, the clam. Now, to be honest, I think with the fish broth, you get the taste of the clam much more than when we use the ocean broth. But
Yeah.
also,
Right. Yeah.
but anyway, because clams have, I mean, clam chowder should taste like clams.
Yeah.
And clams are
It does.
really delicate. A really delicate flavor. So, all right, it's good. Could I eat?
Delicious.
A couple spoonfuls? Yeah. I don't know why. For some reason, shellfish, I'm like that with. I love scallops. It's the only shellfish I like.
Yep.
Which I should do a scallop version of this. But even shrimp, I can eat a couple, 2, 3, and then it's like, okay, that's enough. But anyway, all right. Well, I'm glad you liked it.
I did. Yeah. Delicious.
More importantly, we hope that you guys have enjoyed watching us make our New England clam chowder. I tried to keep it as authentic as I could.
Yeah.
Right, that's it.
This rivals any restaurant, I think. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Please like and subscribe. And check out cherryhillhomecooking.com. We'll see you on the next video.
Ciao.
Bye.
I think it tastes good. You think it tastes good?